I want you to just close your eyes for a second. Picture the Filipino dream. And I don't mean the billboard version with a shiny sports car. I mean the real one.
Mm.
It's a tiny square of land, maybe 100 square meters. You've got a modest hollow block house on it that, isn't quite painted yet. It was bought with years of what the Supreme Court in today's story literally calls blood and tears.
It's really about stability. That's what people are actually buying. It's the knowledge that no matter what happens out there, you have a place to sleep that is yours.
Exactly. So you pay your monthly installments religiously. You trust the developer. You build your roof. And then one day, you get a knock on the door.
Oh, boy.
It's a representative from a massive bank.
Right.
A bank you never signed a single paper with, a bank you've never borrowed a centavo from. And they hand you a letter that effectively says, the developer didn't pay us, so we own this land now. Either pay for your lot all over again or get out.
It sounds like something out of a Kafka novel, but for the families in the case we're covering today, this was an absolutely terrifying reality. This isn't just a story about bad luck. It's a high-speed collision between rigid contract law and the concept of social justice.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking Supreme Court case GR number 104528, Philippine National Bank versus Office of the President.
Decided back in January 1996.
Right, and it's a real David and Goliath battle between the Philippine National Bank, PNB, and a group of regular folks led by a man named Alfonso Maclaya.
And just to keep us grounded, I'm going to be looking at the machinery under the hood. Because while our hearts are obviously with the families, legally speaking, the bank had a terrifyingly strong hand.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They weren't just being, evil villains for the sake of it. They were following the letter of the law, or so they thought, until the Supreme Court stepped in.
Which makes the outcome so much more fascinating. Okay, so let's set the board. Who are the players in this mess?
We have what you could call a triangle of conflict. At the very top, you have the main villain of the piece, the developer, Marikina Village, Inc. They took a plot of land and started selling subdivision lots to private buyers on installment plans.
And that's our second group, the buyers, the little people, as the decision calls them. And they are doing everything right, signing contracts, paying every month.
Correct. But, and this is the key unknown to these buyers, Marikina Village, Inc. was playing a double game. They took the land titles for the very same land they were selling to these families, and they mortgaged them to the Philippine National Bank to secure a massive loan.
Wait, just so I'm clear on the mechanics here.
Yeah.
They sold the land to the buyers, but then pledged the same land to the bank.
Yes. In the eyes of the buyers, they were purchasing a home. In the eyes of the bank, that land was just collateral. The buyers were, and I'm quoting the decision here, powerless to discover this mortgage. It was all done behind their backs.
And of course, inevitably, the whole house of cards collapses.
Right. The developer, Marikina Village, Inc., defaults on their loan. They stop paying PNB. So PNB does what any bank does when a loan goes bad. They foreclosed.
So they take the property.
They auctioned it off, and since they were the highest bidder, they became the new legal owner of the property.
But the property wasn't empty.
Far from it. People were living there. So PNB turns to the buyers and says, look, the developer didn't pay us, so we own the land now. If you want to stay, you have to deal with us.
I can't imagine the panic. You've been paying for years, only to be told your payments went into some kind of black hole because the developer was stiffing the bank. So obviously the buyers fought back.
They did. They went to the Office of the President, the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board, and they actually won in those venues. But PNB appealed all the way to the Supreme Court.
Of course they did.
And this is where we have to, give the devil his due. PNB had a very specific, very logical legal argument. They believed they were protected by the Constitution itself.
Okay, so this brings us to the first big battleground, retroactivity. PNB looked at the calendar and said, we win. Why?
It all comes down to the timelines. The mortgage contract between the developer and PNB was signed on December 18, 1975.
Okay, 1975. Got it. Keep that year in mind.
Now, the law that protects buyers, that's Presidential Decree 957, the Subdivision and Condominium Buyers Protective Decree, that wasn't enacted until July 12, 1976.
Almost 7 months later.
Exactly. So PNB's lawyers went straight to Article 4 of the Civil Code. It states the general rule, laws shall have no retroactive effect.
Meaning you can't punish me today for something I did yesterday that was totally legal at the time. You can't change the rules of the game after the match has started.
Precisely. It's a bedrock principle of fairness. PNB argued that applying PD 957 to their existing mortgage was, well, illegal. They signed that mortgage in good faith under the laws of 1975.
It's a solid argument on paper.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if courts just started applying new laws backward in time, nobody would ever sign a contract. Business would freeze. So how did the Supreme Court, led by Justice Panganaban, get around that?
They did something fascinating. They stopped looking at the letter of the law and went straight for the spirit, what we call legislative intent. The court looked at the preamble of PD 957.
The intro section that most lawyers probably skip.
Usually, yes. But here, the preamble was the smoking gun. It explicitly states that the law was created because of reports of alarming magnitude about swindling. It talks about fraudulent manipulations perpetrated by unscrupulous subdivision sellers.
So the court is saying, look, this law wasn't passed just to regulate future sales. It was passed to stop a crime wave that was already happening.
Correct. The court reasoned that the entire purpose of this decree was to stop exactly what was happening to these buyers. If they didn't apply it retroactively, they'd be letting the fraudulent manipulations continue just because of a calendar date.
They'd be protecting the fraud instead of the victims. There is a quote here from the decision that it stands out. It says, PD 957 was meant to provide a protective mantle over helpless citizens who may fall prey to the razzmatazz of unscrupulous subdivision sellers.
Razzmatazz. You really don't see that word in Supreme Court decisions very often.
No, but it perfectly captures the vibe, right? The flashy brochures, the free snacks, the promises.
Yeah.
All while they're mortgaging the land out from under you.
And the court used that idea to balance the power dynamics. They compared the two parties. On one side, you have PNB. The decision calls them a gigantic financial institution.
Right.
They have armies of lawyers, vast resources, and the ability and the duty to conduct due diligence.
Which means checking your work, checking the goods before you buy them.
Yes. The court was very critical here. They said PNB could have easily conducted an ocular inspection. If they had sent just one person to the site in Marikina before foreclosing, what would they have seen?
They would have seen houses, laundry on the line, tricycles parked out front, people living their lives.
Right. They would have seen possession. They couldn't claim they were innocent or unaware. Compare that to the buyers, who the court called powerless. So the reasoning is, when you have a conflict between the weak and the strong, the law must favor the weak.
An instrument of social justice.
Therefore, the protective intent of PD 957 has to override the timeline argument.
I love that concept, but I know some people listening are thinking, okay, that feels good, but you can't just vibe your way out of a statute. Did the court have concrete proof within the law itself that it was meant to be retroactive?
They did. And this is where we get to the police power override. The legal analyst in me loves this part because it connects a simple housing case to the highest powers of the state.
Okay, break down police power for us first. It sounds like handcuffs and jail cells.
It's a common misconception. In constitutional law, police power is the state's inherent authority to enact laws for the public health, safety, welfare. It's the most powerful attribute of government.
Okay, so how does that apply to a mortgage contract?
The court pointed to sections 20, 21, and 23 of PD 957. Specifically, section 21 talks about sales prior to decree. It says that even for lots sold before the law was passed, developers still have to complete the roads, the water systems, all of it.
Ah, so if the developer has to fix the roads for old projects, the law is basically admitting it applies to the past.
Exactly. If specific parts are retroactive, it implies the whole spirit is retroactive. But this is where PNB threw up their biggest shield, the impairment clause of the Constitution.
That's the heavy artillery. The Constitution says, no law shall be passed impairing the obligation of contracts. You can't have the government stepping in and just shredding private agreements.
It used to be considered absolute, but the court here cited Justice Izagani Cruz, a giant of Philippine law, to explain why that shield is cracked. They argued that private contracts suffer from a congenital infirmity.
A congenital infirmity. That sounds like a medical diagnosis.
It means that every private contract is born with a weakness. It is susceptible to change by the legislature if the public welfare demands it.
Okay, give me an analogy.
Think of zoning laws. Let's say you and I sign a contract where I sell you land to build a factory. It's all legal. But next year, the city passes a law banning factories in that area because of pollution.
I can't say, hey, my contract is older than your law. Let me build my factory.
Exactly. The police power of the state to protect public health overrides our private deal. The court viewed housing the same way. The state has a massive interest in ensuring people have homes. That public interest overrides the private contract between the bank and the developer.
So PNB loses the retroactivity battle. The law applies. But they weren't done. They had a second defense, which honestly sounds even more logical to a layperson, the defense of privity of contract.
Yes, this is the "it's not my problem" defense. PNB argued, look, we are strangers to these buyers. We never signed a deal with Mr. Maglaya. Our contract is with the developer. We are not privy to their agreements.
It makes perfect sense. If I buy a coffee from a cafe and the cafe doesn't pay their bean supplier, the supplier can't come to my house and demand I pay for the beans. I don't have a contract with them.
That's how Article 1311 of the Civil Code usually works. Contracts take effect only between the parties who sign them. But the Supreme Court completely smacked this down using Section 18 of PD 957.
What's the magic bullet in Section 18?
Section 18 is about mortgages, and it explicitly allows the buyer to pay their installments directly to the mortgagee, in this case, the bank, if the developer fails to pay.
Oh, that changes the entire relationship, doesn't it?
It creates a statutory bridge. Even if PNB didn't sign a paper with the buyer, the law says the buyer has the option to bypass the developer and pay the bank directly. A connection is forged by law.
So PNB can't refuse the payments.
The court ruled they are obliged to accept them. They have to accept the remaining amortizations from the buyers.
So instead of kicking the buyers out, PNB is forced to step into the developer's shoes.
In a way, yes. PNB has to respect the original purchase agreements. If a buyer still owes, say, 50,000 pesos on the lot, PNB has to accept that 50,000 pesos and then release the title.
Even if the land is now worth 10 times that amount.
Yes. They can't demand the current market value, and they certainly can't foreclose. The court basically said, you accepted the mortgage on a subdivision, you knew there were buyers, you're stuck with their contracts.
That is a massive blow to the stranger defense.
Yeah.
But I want to pivot to the part of this decision that really elevates it. It's when the court stops talking about legal sections and starts talking to the bank like a disappointed parent.
You're referring to the "so what" part of the decision. This is where the court discusses the bank as an instrument of the state.
Yes. The court basically told PNB, stop looking at this as just a lawsuit you need to win.
It's a powerful admonition. Justice Panganban writes that legal issues are not decided in a vacuum. He says law is merely a brick in the upbuilding of the social edifice.
A brick in the social edifice. That's just beautiful writing. But what does it mean for a bank, practically?
It reminds PNB of who they are. PNB isn't just any private commercial bank. At the time, they were the state bank, an instrument of state policy.
And that policy isn't just profit. The policy is the Filipino dream. The decision even mentions the country's drive toward inicehood.
Right. ENIC for newly industrialized country. This was the mid-90s, remember. The Philippines 2000 vision was in full swing. The government was trying to build a stable middle class.
And you can't have a stable industrialized country if your middle class is being thrown out of their homes by the state bank itself.
Precisely. The court pointed out that PNB had made record earnings and had an enviable international stature.
That part felt like a real sting. It was like the court was saying, you guys are rich, you have branches in New York and Hong Kong. Why are you bullying Mr. Maglaya for a few thousand pesos?
It was a moral verdict. The court said PNB should be happy to see justice served, that they shouldn't be fighting these little people for the scraps. The loss on this property is nothing compared to the integrity of the social edifice.
It fundamentally reframes the bank's role. They aren't just a moneylender. They are a pillar of the community with a responsibility to uphold fairness.
And practically, the ruling affirmed the earlier decision. The buyers just had to continue paying the remaining balance to the bank. Once they were paid up, PNB had to issue the titles. The little people kept their homes.
It's one of those rare moments where you feel like the system actually worked for the guy who wakes up early, takes the jeepney to work, and just wants a roof over his head.
It established that the intent of the legislature to protect the vulnerable is powerful enough to reach back in time. That's the retroactivity. And to rewrite the terms of engagement between a massive bank and a regular citizen, that's the police power.
So to wrap this all up, we saw the iron hand of the state, which is usually a scary phrase, actually used here to stop what the court called a feeble exercise of police power by the bank.
Correct. They reinforced that property rights, while sacred, still have to bow down to public welfare, and they reminded financial institutions that they don't operate in a vacuum.
Which brings me to a thought I want to leave our listener with. This decision is from 1996. That's nearly 30 years ago. The court spoke about banks being happy to serve social justice.
A different time, perhaps?
Maybe. So here's my question to you listening right now. In today's economy, where every single decimal point of profit is scrutinized by shareholders, do we still see financial institutions acting as instruments of social justice? Or has the profit motive completely eclipsed that state policy role?
It's a heavy question. If this same case happened today, would a bank back down? Or would they just fight even harder?
Something to chew on. But if there's one takeaway from GR Now 104528, it's that sometimes the law does have a heart, especially when the roof over your head is at stake.
And that at least is a comforting precedent to have on the books.
Keep dreaming that Filipino dream, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.